Earlier this year, in January, the United States designated the Wagner Group as a, quote, transnational criminal organization, imposing new sanctions on that group. The Wagner Group, which now claims control of the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don, is an entity you've likely heard about throughout Russia's war effort in Ukraine, but you may not know exactly what it is. The White House says the Wagner Group is in part a, quote, criminal organization that is committing widespread human rights abuses. The Wagner Group is also linked to Russia. It has essentially been a private mercenary militia force for hire under Russian control, but technically it operates outside of Russian law. The group's founder is this guy named Yevgeny Prigozhin. He's now leading what appears to be an armed rebellion or a coup against the Kremlin. He's got close ties to Vladimir Putin. He was actually nicknamed Putin's chef. Not really a chef, he was a caterer. He first came about back in 2014. He played a role in Russia's invasion of the Donbass in eastern Ukraine and Crimea. He's also got experience on behalf of Russia in conflicts in Syria, Libya, and elsewhere. Now, the Wagner Group has a reputation for being inhumane, committing human rights abuses and atrocities, according to the UN and human rights organizations. That's continued in the war in Ukraine, where, according to the White House, Wagner at one point commanded roughly 50,000 troops, playing a vital role in Russia's war effort, although only about a quarter of the force is actually trained and are contracted as mercenaries. The rest are made up of newly recruited Russian convicts. That said, Wagner has also suffered tremendous losses fighting in Ukraine, but with all this comes power. And as we are now seeing play out, Prigozhin has been rather brazen in publicly speaking out about the Kremlin's military failures in Ukraine, offering harsh criticisms for top-ranking officials, including the defense minister Sergei Shoigu and the leader of Russia's forces in Ukraine, the chief of staff, General Valery Gerasimov. Back in January, the White House said it believed that there were, quote, mounting tensions between Wagner and the Kremlin, and that Wagner has established itself as a, quote, rival power center to Russia's own military. Joining me now is Colin Clark. He's the director of research for the Soufan Group. He's also a senior research fellow at the Soufan Center. He's an associate fellow at the International Center for Counterterrorism at The Hague. He's the author of numerous books, including Terrorism, Inc., The Financing of Terrorism, Insurgency, and Irregular Warfare. Colin, thank you for being with us. I believe the Soufan Group's got a report coming out on the Wagner Group this week. But I need you to help me understand this. Until now, we have known them to be a mercenary group, soldiers for hire, generally speaking, higher caliber soldiers than the Russian military has been able to recruit for itself during this war. But what has happened now? Is this, in your opinion, some sort of an armed rebellion or a coup?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ali. It totally appears to be a coup set in motion by this growing dispute between Prigozhin and senior Russian military leaders. Up until now, Prigozhin's been careful not to threaten Putin directly. Now seems he's crossed that line. We're in a kind of full-scale civil conflict. We've got Chechen units coming in to fight against Prigozhin's forces, so it's a total mess. But there are serious implications for what happens next in Ukraine, because Wagner's been really the muscle behind a lot of the territorial gains, including in Bakhmut. But further afield, as you mentioned earlier, Wagner is active and present in Syria, Libya, Mali, the Central African Republic, Sudan, Venezuela, and many other places. So with this conflict, what happens to Russian influence in those countries if Wagner is no longer a viable entity there?
So one of the things that Richard Engel did a couple of weeks ago is he was in the Central African Republic demonstrating how Wagner actually prefers to work in some of these other places. They seem to like to work clear of the Russian military. They seem to like to get paid the way they get paid. Is Prigozhin's beef with Putin about the war in Ukraine? Is it about not getting the equipment that he thought he was supposed to get? Is it about the fact that he has to deal with or answer to people in the Russian military who he thinks are incompetent? Do we know what the beef is here?
I think it's all of the above, and Prigozhin hasn't been shy about releasing, these kind of invectives on Telegram, where he's screaming at Shoigu and Gerasimov and making complaints about ammunition. He does want more credit. He sees his fighters as kind of a separate vanguard, an elite vanguard from the Russian military. It feels like he's not getting the support that he needs, and this has all kind of come to a head. Frankly, I'm surprised it took this long. I did see that really excellent report by Richard Engel in the Central African Republic, which also reminds us that Wagner is it's more than a mercenary group. I liken Wagner to a Swiss Army knife. They can do a lot of things. Yes, they can do offensive combat operations. They can provide security to military juntas, but they also have their hands in extractive resources. They can help evade sanctions. They also run disinformation campaigns for various dictators. So this isn't a one-trick pony. This is a really useful tool of Russian foreign policy, which Moscow may no longer have.
Colin, let's talk a bit about the likelihood here. What has to happen for Prigozhin to succeed? We have unconfirmed reports that they may be moving on from Rostov-on-Don. Maybe they're keeping some people there, but they are moving toward Moscow. He may or may not. He claims to have 25,000 troops under his control. That may or may not be true. But the bottom line is, for him to succeed against the Russian military, which is amassing in Moscow and major cities around Russia now to protect the homeland, something more has to happen. This guy and his ragtag bunch of mercenaries are not going to overthrow the Russian government unless other generals, other politicians, or popular support joins them.
Yeah, you'd have to see large-scale defections from the upper reaches of various kind of Russian elite security services. I think it's highly unlikely that we get to that point. You know, for Vladimir Putin, failure in Ukraine, in the quote-unquote special military operation Ukraine, is manageable. Failure in Russia itself would be fatal. And so I expect the Kremlin to marshal all resources at their disposal to put down this uprising and to really kind of take a no-holds-barred approach into quashing this rebellion. And things could get very bloody very soon in Russia. And I think, we're all kind of waiting with bated breath to see what happens next.
What should my viewer, who probably reflects some of my views on the fact that Russia shouldn't have invaded an independent country, think about how any of this plays in terms of the war in Ukraine? I'm trying to underscore the point that Prigozhin would prosecute the war in Ukraine too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's various opportunities for the Ukrainians now to make significant gains, to press their counteroffensive, to retake certain territory. Moscow's distracted, to say the least. And I think, the Ukrainians have proven adept throughout this conflict at information warfare. So we're likely to see them attempting to kind of muddy the waters even further. And so there could be significant gains coming on the heels of this. Really a great opportunity for Kyiv to retake some of the territory that the Russians have gobbled up over this course. I'd also like to say, this should be kind of an inflection point for those in the West, in the U.S. and NATO countries that haven't supported the war up until this point, haven't supported the support to the Ukrainians. Look, it's working. We need to kind of hold the line here because Russia is crumbling, and all this support, both in terms of material support but also moral support, makes a difference.
Colin, thanks very much for your expertise. We are now going, I don't know if you guys can rush this report you're coming out with, but I know you've got a report coming out on the Wagner Group. People were always interested in it. Now it's imperative that we understand who they are. Colin Clark is the Director of Research at the Soufan Group. He's the author of numerous books, including Terrorism, Inc., The Financing of Terrorism, Insurgency, and Irregular Warfare.